The fluorescent lights in the server room hummed like a distant warning as Derek Vance pushed open the heavy door without knocking. Starbucks cup in one hand, smug confidence radiating off him like cheap cologne. I was hunched over the terminal, fingers pausing mid-keystroke on a routine diagnostic. "You're not supposed to be in here without clearance," I said quietly, not bothering to turn fully. He laughed that short, dismissive bark of his. "No offense, Lena, but your grip on these systems feels excessive. We're taking full admin rights going forward. Company needs centralized control." The silence that followed pressed against my chest. I tapped one key, and the screen flashed a locked biometric prompt: my face, my fingerprint, my encrypted signature. His name wasn't anywhere in the authorization hierarchy. I watched his smirk flicker, just for a second, before he recovered. That's when I knew the war had started, though he still thought it was just a polite handover. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. Not without legal review. Simple words. But they landed like a verdict. Derek had only been at Apex Innovations for 3 weeks, fresh from a string of startup flips where code was treated like communal pizza and ownership went to whoever shouted loudest in the war room. He came from that world, rapid iterations, branding sprints over lunch, and a belief that any system running on company servers automatically belonged to the C-suite. But Vanguard Protocol wasn't born on company time. It wasn't coded on company laptops. And it sure as hell wasn't built with company IP. My mind drifted back as the tension thickened. 8 years earlier, in a tiny rented apartment overlooking Puget Sound in Seattle, I'd stared at my personal MacBook under the glow of a single desk lamp while rain pattered against the window. I'd just wrapped another 60-hour week maintaining Apex's patchwork security layers. But the real work, the work that mattered, happened after midnight. I'd formed Harper Secure Tech LLC 2 months before renewing my contract, filed every paper with Washington State, paid the fees from my own savings. The carve-out clause in my employment agreement was ironclad, signed by the old CTO and legal counsel back when they still valued precision over speed. Section 7.4 explicitly disclaimed any company claim on work developed off hours, off premises, with private resources. I'd timestamped every commit from my home IP, routed everything through encrypted personal cloud accounts billed to my LLC. No company time. No company hardware. No ambiguity. Vanguard wasn't just code. It was the invisible backbone, hierarchical access controls, real-time key rotation, multi-layered encryption that segregated tenants so cleanly you could run competing clients on the same cluster without leaks. Deployments that once took hours now happened in under 2 minutes. Breach attempts were isolated and neutralized before they could spread. Half the engineering floor didn't fully grasp the algorithms. They just knew that when the system hummed, everything else worked. I had poured sleepless nights, quiet weekends, and every spare dollar into it because I saw the fragility in modern tech stacks. 1 weak permission layer, and federal contracts worth hundreds of millions could evaporate in a compliance audit. Derek didn't see any of that. To him, it was the back end. When his all-hands email hit inboxes that Wednesday morning, credential consolidation, full admin required across core systems by Friday Yodi, my stomach tightened. But panic didn't follow. I read it twice, then pulled up my private archive drive. The 2016 incorporation papers. AWS bills charged to my personal card. Git logs showing 2 a.m. Commits from my home router on holidays when the rest of the team posted vacation photos from the San Juans. The notarized addendum attached to my contract. 4 bullet points crystal clear. Not company equipment. Not company time. Not company IP. Not negotiable. His Slack follow-up came fast. Built while employed here? Company controls it. As if a paycheck rewrote federal IP law and state filings. I didn't reply with anger. Anger was wasteful. Instead, I sat in the break room, watching him through the glass wall as he laughed too loud at his own joke, spinning his wireless earbuds case like a trophy. He had no clue he'd triggered the first silent alarm. Because Vanguard didn't just manage access, it audited every probe, every unauthorized handshake, logging IPs, timestamps, and user signatures with cryptographic proof. Derek's name was already flagged. The next day, the meeting invite landed like a guillotine, 10:45 a.m. Thursday. No agenda. Just my name alongside his and HR's. I walked into the glass-walled conference room without sitting. Derek leaned back in his chair, posture screaming victory. HR avoided my eyes. Laptop open to what looked like a scripted checklist. "We're streamlining leadership," he announced in that faux reasonable tone. "Your contributions are appreciated, but we'll manage the transition internally." He slid across a printed list, every module I'd architected, every integration point, every sandbox and production pipeline, with checkboxes like I was an intern clocking out. Then the demand: "We'll also need the master token for Vanguard. It's integrated into company infrastructure now, so it's ours." He said it with that smirk, as if integrated magically voided 7 years of documented evidence. I folded the paper once, twice, slipped it into my bag like a receipt, and repeated, "Not without legal. No drama. No slammed doors. Just truth." I left the building and headed straight to a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks away, ordered an Earl Grey I wouldn't touch, and opened my laptop. Before the tea cooled, I'd forwarded a sealed digital package to my attorney. Contracts, receipts, logs. The full carve-out with Derek's blind spot highlighted. Then I activated the safeguard protocols I'd embedded years ago, a dead man switch that mirrored every access attempt to an independent escrow service and triggered escalating alerts on repeated failures. By morning, the first panicked call came from a lawyer I hadn't heard from in years. Subject line: urgent follow-up. I let it ring. They had time to read the bundle I dropped into General Counsel's inbox at precisely 10 a.m., curated, time-stamped, bulletproof. Code provenance with off-site metadata. Server invoices spanning 6 years. Zero ties to Apex. The signed 2016 carve-out. Bolded clause 7.4. State registration for Harper Secure Tech LLC. The final page warned plainly, unauthorized access attempts would trigger material breach. They thought I was bluffing. Derek especially swaggered into meetings that morning like he'd already won. But the moat had teeth, and every bite left evidence. The panic didn't explode immediately. It seeped in quietly, like fog rolling off Elliott Bay. By lunchtime, Slack threads shortened, meeting durations lengthened, and compliance suddenly remembered my name after years of silence. One engineer pinged me off record. "They're tearing through old contracts like it's the end times." I didn't respond, but I watched the logs in real time. An internal IP tried resetting Vanguard's recovery sequence at 11:17 a.m., flagged instantly. Mirrored to escrow. Notification queued. I thought about the human cost as I sipped cold tea. For years, I'd been the quiet one at Apex, the woman who delivered flawless uptime without seeking credit, who fixed crises at 3 a.m. while managers slept. My reputation was built on reliability, not showmanship. But reliability looks like weakness to men like Derek, who mistook silence for submission. He'd already restructured 2 teams, renegotiated vendor deals without procurement sign-off, and renamed infrastructure Cloud Resilience Vanguard in some branding brainstorm that ignored actual architecture. Speed was his religion. Caution was cowardice. Flashback to 2019, I demoed the first stable version of Vanguard internally during a low-key brown bag session. Deployment times dropped 80%. Breach exposure metrics plummeted. The old CTO had nodded appreciatively. Signed a third-party licensing memo acknowledging it as external IP, and logged it in the policy portal. Everyone moved on until now, when the system had become indispensable. Investor dashboards, federal contract pipelines, virtual desktop rollouts, all orchestrated through Vanguard's layers. They hadn't just used it, they'd bet multi-million-dollar projections on it. Derek's private Slack thread surfaced later that day, forwarded anonymously by someone in risk management. Need full admin on Vanguard regardless of off-hours claims. Too critical to leave external. Dated weeks after the compliance memo had been acknowledged company-wide. Ignorance compounded by arrogance. The audit trails didn't forgive. Every failed probe triggered licensing clauses requiring formal notification and replication to my legal partner. They were lighting flares with every desperate touch. By late afternoon, a former mentee texted from her personal phone, redlining her carve-out in panic mode over here. Legals in tria. I smiled faintly. They weren't seeking truth anymore. They hunted loopholes, retroactive amendments, forgotten signatures. Anything to rewrite history. Nothing existed. The founder, Marcus Lang, no relation, had signed early carve-outs himself before stepping back from daily operations, burned out by egos that valued monetization over vision. The investor slide leak hit next. A contact sent a screenshot from the Q3 deck, projected efficiency gains of 47%, breach reductions of 29%, all attributed to proprietary internal orchestration layer. Vanguard listed as native IP. They'd sold my work in pitch decks, touted it in tech demos, promised features they couldn't deliver once the time lock engaged. I'd wired a subtle self-disable mechanism months earlier. Any attempt to mark my credentials inactive triggered graceful degradation of non-essential flows. The virtual desktop integration they'd bragged about? Offline. Sandbox provisioning? Blocked. Their CTO's service account pinged 3 times that morning, error 403 each time, with full audit escalation. The company wasn't just locked out, they were exposed. Federal contracts carried strict compliance riders, forcing entry-risk breach notifications, potential audits, and millions in penalties. I wasn't blocking them. Their own reckless logs were. Emotionally, it stung. Betrayal tasted metallic. I'd given loyalty to Apex because the mission, secure infrastructure for critical sectors, meant something. But loyalty proved one way when Derek arrived with his mandate and smirk. In the coffee shop, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I being too rigid? Then I remembered the late nights, the personal sacrifices, the pride in building something elegant and unbreakable. No. This was principle wrapped in code. Derek's radio silence that day spoke volumes. No follow-up emails. No Slack pings. But the General Counsel's office finally reached out, requesting clarification re. Section 7.4. Polite panic. By evening, the desperation was palpable. Longer invites, shorter messages, whispers in hallways I could almost hear through the walls. They had built an empire on scaffolding they'd known, and the first strong wind threatened collapse. I closed my laptop as dusk settled over Seattle. Rain starting again. The switch was live. Every subsequent attempt would tighten the noose. Derek thought he'd consolidated power. Instead, he'd triggered a reckoning that would expose the rot at the core. The scramble intensified over the next 48 hours. Behind closed doors, legal teams dissected decades of paperwork like archaeologists on a deadline. I monitored passively from my home office, Vanguard's monitoring dashboard glowing on dual screens. Each unauthorized probe, there were 7 more by Friday evening, generated immutable logs, source IP, attempted privilege escalation vector, failure reason, cryptographic hash chain. all mirrored safely off-site. An old colleague in risk management called late Friday, voice low. They're trying to reclassify Vanguard as work for hire in some internal memo draft. It's not landing. The carve-out's bulletproof. I thanked her and hung up. They were correcting errors. They were rewriting reality to fit the narrative Derek had sold upstairs, that I would fold under pressure. The real fracture appeared when the virtual desktop rollout demo failed publicly. During a cross-team sync, screens froze. Credential sync broke, and users reported intermittent lockouts. The CTO blamed transient network issues, but the logs told the truth. Vanguard had throttled flows after credential drift detection. Features once seamless now required manual workarounds. Projected quarterly savings evaporated overnight. Investors watching the deck remotely noticed the hesitation in explanations. Meanwhile, I received a direct outreach from Nexus Dynamics, a rival firm based in Bellevue that had quietly admired Vanguard's architecture after a leaked white paper snippet circulated in security circles. Their general counsel was blunt on the encrypted call. We know what it does. We want exclusive licensing. We'll handle compliance, overhead, marketing push, and give you environment sovereignty plus top-line credits. The terms were generous, far beyond what Apex had ever offered in recognition. It wasn't revenge driving me, it was pragmatism. Apex had turned my loyalty into a dead end. Nexus saw the value clearly. Negotiations moved fast. I insisted on ironclad exclusivity clauses, full-stack integration roadmaps, and marketing prominence. They agreed without hesitation. Recognizing the competitive edge Vanguard would deliver, deployment times halved. Breach exposure cut dramatically. Adaptive boundaries that evolved with threats. By Sunday evening, heads of agreement were signed digitally. The bridge to Apex was burned cleanly. Derek's overreach had consequences beyond access denial. Their investor presentation the following week featured the same slides touting efficiency gains, but live demo stuttered. One key stakeholder asked pointed questions about the orchestration layer after noticing anomalies. Whispers spread in private equity circles, efficiency claims suddenly questionable. Emotionally, the weight pressed heavier. I replayed the server room confrontation in quiet moments, feeling the mix of vindication and sorrow. The quiet architect no one noticed had become the linchpin they couldn't afford to lose. Pride swelled alongside grief for what the company could have been with mutual respect. Legal sent the mediation request Monday. Discuss terms.
No apology.
Just pragmatism. I forwarded it to counsel with instructions. Refer to carve out or escalate to founder. The founder, Marcus Lang, remained the ultimate arbiter. His signature on early documents carried weight. The founder call came at noon sharp. Marcus Lang appeared on video. Older, wearier, but eyes sharp. Is this yours? He asked simply, skipping pleasantries. I shared my screen, full repo history with external metadata. Deployment logs free of company infrastructure.
Signed contracts.
Clause 7.4 highlighted. His own initials visible. Digital signatures verified. He listened in silence for 10 full seconds after I finished, then said, "Thank you. We'll handle it." The screen went dark. Recognition without argument. The cleanup belonged to them now. 2 weeks later, a subtle SEC amendment appeared buried in quarterly filings, language about internally developed access control architecture, quietly excised, replaced by neutral references to licensed external frameworks. No fanfare. Derek Vance's departure was noted even more obliquely in an internal newsletter, leadership realignment for long-term growth. No farewell. No announcement. Just gone. I finalized the Nexus deal in a sunlit conference room overlooking Lake Washington. Contracts executed. Integration timeline set. Marketing campaigns greenlit. Vanguard would thrive under new stewardship, powering systems that protected critical data with the elegance I'd always intended. Reflection came in waves. The victory wasn't loud, it was paper trails longer than lies. Safeguards stronger than titles. Quiet competence outlasting arrogance. They tried to consolidate control. I consolidated truth. The market, the contracts, the future belonged to those who respected the work, not those who seized it. What lingered was the question: how many quiet builders are erased daily by those who mistake silence for surrender? In tech's relentless churn, ownership isn't declared, it's proven. Protected. Defended. I had done all three without raising my voice. Apex kept their press releases. I kept the blueprint, the keys, and the integrity. The final weeks brought closure wrapped in quiet finality. Apex's federal contracts faced internal audits triggered by the flagged attempts, forcing costly remediation plans. Compliance teams scrambled to document workarounds, but the efficiency projections they'd sold investors now required footnotes and qualifiers. Stock whispers circulated, nothing catastrophic, but enough to erode confidence in leadership narratives. I walked away entirely, focusing on the Nexus integration. The first joint demo went flawlessly, deployments in 90 seconds, encryption rotating seamlessly, threat isolation surgical. Their team expressed genuine awe at the architecture's depth. For the first time in years, my work received credit without extraction. Personal life shifted too. Evenings once spent debugging now included walks along the waterfront, rain or shine, processing the emotional arc from the initial shock in the server room, through the meticulous evidence gathering, to the founder's acknowledgement. Betrayal had sharpened resolve. Victory brought perspective. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the patient accumulation of proof, the foresight to embed safeguards, the courage to walk away when loyalty is unreciprocated. Friends asked if I felt triumphant. I described it differently, relief mixed with melancholy. The system I built to protect others had protected me in the end. Derek's type, flashy. Entitled, dismissive of foundations, flamed out predictably when confronted with documented reality. The company paid the price in credibility, contracts, and quiet reputational damage. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge or ego. It was about boundaries, respect, and the quiet power of preparation. In America's tech ecosystem, where innovation races against exploitation, creators must safeguard their contributions legally and technically. They hadn't respected it. The consequences followed logically, inexorably. As I watched the first Nexus-branded deployment go live from my updated home setup, a sense of closure settled. The blueprint endured. The market moved forward. And somewhere in a Seattle high-rise, executives likely still wondered how the quiet one had held the detonator all along, without ever needing to shout. The rain fell steadily outside, washing the city clean. I closed the laptop, brewed fresh tea, and allowed myself a small, private smile. Some victories echo longest in silence.